Okay, ready to dive into a world where things aren't always as they seem.
Sounds intriguing.
We're talking power dynamics, the kind Robert Greene lays out in his book, The 48 Laws of Power.
Ah, a fascinating look at the often subtle strategies people use to get ahead.
Exactly. And we've got some excerpts to help us unpack a few of the most interesting laws, see how they play out in real-world situations.
It's almost like everyone's playing this game even if they don't realize it.
Right. And Greene doesn't hold back, starting with law number 1, never outshine the master.
Now, that one might sound counterintuitive at first.
You're telling me, why shouldn't you want to impress those above you?
Because making your superiors feel threatened is a surefire way to sabotage your own progress. Think about it. Who wants to feel like their position is in jeopardy?
Makes sense. Greene uses the example of Nicolas Fouquet, Louis XIV's finance minister. Tried to impress the king with this over-the-top party.
Ah, yes, Fouquet. Built an extravagant chateau, spared no expense, even had Molière write a play for the occasion.
Talk about trying to make a good impression.
Well, it backfired spectacularly. The king felt completely overshadowed, saw it as a direct threat to his authority.
And to really drive the point home, Fouquet ended up imprisoned. So what's the lesson here? Don't throw parties.
Not necessarily. It's about understanding that overt displays of talent can be perceived as a challenge, especially by those in positions of power.
So a little humility goes a long way.
Exactly. Discreet flattery is far more effective than trying to steal the show. A well-placed compliment, a subtle acknowledgement of their expertise, that's how you gain favor without stepping on any toes.
Less is more. Got it. But Greene also talks about Basilius, this stable boy who rose to become a Byzantine emperor. How'd he manage that without outshining anyone?
Basilius is a classic example of using this law strategically. He understood the importance of making his master, Emperor Michael III, feel secure, even superior.
So while everyone else was busy trying to impress, he was playing a different game.
Exactly. Outwardly, he showed deference, played the humble servant. But behind the scenes, he was consolidating his power, building alliances, amassing wealth, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
Talk about playing the long game. But how can our listeners apply this law in their own lives? I mean, most of us aren't trying to become emperors.
It's about finding that sweet spot, showcasing your talents without making your boss feel threatened. Offer helpful suggestions. Take initiative on projects that align with their goals. Be reliable, be supportive. Prove your worth without overshadowing them.
It's like office politics, but with a bit more finesse. Okay, let's move on to law number 3. Conceal your intentions.
Ah, this one has a bit of a spy thriller vibe to it.
Right. It's all about keeping your cards close to your chest, making sure no one knows your true motives, kind of like a poker face for life.
In a way, yes. You want to be able to read others while remaining unreadable yourself. It's not about being dishonest.
But it's about being strategic with the information you reveal.
Exactly. Revealing your intentions too early can give others the opportunity to sabotage your plans.
So how do you walk that line? Being strategic without being deceptive, what's a real-world example?
Let's say you've got this brilliant idea at work, but you know your boss is resistant to change. Instead of hitting them with a full-blown presentation right off the bat, start planting seeds. Casually mention the benefits of similar projects, gauge their interest, subtly get them on board with the concept before revealing your full hand.
I like it. It's about being persuasive without being pushy. Speaking of persuasion, Greene also talks about this elaborate con game involving a boxing match. What was that all about?
You're talking about the yellow kid. This guy was a master of deception, and his scheme perfectly illustrates the principle of concealing your intentions.
Right. He wanted to con this guy into investing in a fixed boxing match. But going straight for the ass would have been way too obvious. Yeah. Right.
Of course. So he created a smokescreen, a seemingly legitimate business opportunity, the sale of a lodge. This distraction made his target much more receptive to the idea of the fixed fight later on.
Like a magician's misdirection trick. But why bring the uncle into it? What was the point of that whole charade?
Ah, that was a crucial element. People are more likely to trust someone who seems like an authority figure. By staging that fake argument with the uncle, the yellow kid created a sense of urgency, made his target feel like he needed to step in, save the day by investing.
Wow, talk about manipulation. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? Should we all be wary of uncles now?
Well, not necessarily, but it highlights the importance of being aware of distractions and smokescreens. When someone's pushing for a quick decision, especially when money's involved, take a step back. Ask yourself, What's the real agenda here? Is there something they're trying to hide?
Critical thinking is key, especially when someone's trying to sweet-talk you into something. All right, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about law number 6, court attention at all costs.
Ugh, this one's all about visibility. Recognizing that in the game of power, attention equals influence. Good or bad, it doesn't really matter.
So any press is good press. That seems a bit risky.
It can be, but the point is that as long as people are talking about you, you're in a position to shape their perceptions. Greene uses the example of P.T. Barnum, the ultimate showman.
Oh yeah, Barnum was a master of self-promotion. Didn't he even stage fake scandals just to stay in the public eye?
Absolutely. He understood that controversy creates buzz. And buzz, whether positive or negative, keeps you relevant.
So it's about being memorable, even if it means being a bit outrageous. But what about mystery? How does that play into courting attention?
Greene argues that a touch of mystery can make you far more intriguing. Think about it. Reveal everything about yourself and you become predictable, boring. But hold back a little, cultivate an air of mystique. People want to know more.
I see your point. It's like the "I'm not telling you everything" approach.
Yeah.
Makes you seem more interesting, right?
Exactly, and it can be incredibly effective. Think about Count Victor Lustig, the guy who sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice.
Oh, come on. That's a legend, right?
It really happened. Lustig was a master of creating this aura of mystery around himself, dropping hints about his past, his connections, his wealth, never revealing too much. People were drawn to him, desperate to be in his good graces.
Wow, that's incredible. So how can our listeners apply this in a way that doesn't involve conning people out of landmarks?
It's about finding that sweet spot between being open and approachable while still maintaining a sense of intrigue. Share your knowledge without giving away all your secrets. Be selective with the information you reveal. Project confidence.
So it's about being strategic with your personal brand, creating that aura of "I know something you don't," without being arrogant or aloof.
Precisely. And that can be a powerful tool in any social setting.
All right, let's move on to something that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Log 22, the surrender tactic.
Now, this one often throws people off.
You think, why on earth would you want to surrender? Doesn't that make you look weak?
Not necessarily. Law 22 is about recognizing when a fight is unwinnable. Instead of digging in your heels, choosing to surrender can actually be a powerful strategic move.
So it's like a strategic retreat.
Exactly. You're buying yourself time. Time to recover, regroup, plan your next move. Sometimes retreating is the smartest thing you can do.
Okay, I can see that. Like if you're literally in a war, it makes sense to retreat if you're outmatched. But what about in everyday life, when you can't just physically walk away?
Think of it as surrendering to the idea of learning. Let's say you're in a new job and everyone does things differently. Instead of resisting their methods, surrender to the idea of learning from them. You might pick up some valuable new techniques, adapt them to your own style, and ultimately come out ahead.
So it's about choosing your battles, knowing when to yield in order to gain knowledge or a strategic advantage. That's a pretty interesting take on surrender. Greene also talks about Gujian, the king of Yo, and how he used surrender to his advantage. Can you tell us more about that?
Gujian was forced to surrender to the kingdom of Wu. But instead of letting defeat crush him, he used it as an opportunity. For years, he endured humiliation, serving the king of Wu as a servant. All the while, he was secretly rebuilding his strength, plotting his revenge.
That's some serious dedication. So what happened in the end? Did his plan work?
When the time was right, Gujian launched his counterattack. He crushed the kingdom of Wu and reclaimed his throne. His story is a testament to the power of patience, strategic thinking, and knowing when to bide your time.
It's like he turned his weakness into his greatest strength. All right, let's move on to something a little more dazzling. Law number 34. Create compelling spectacles.
This one's all about understanding the power of visuals, symbols, creating an experience that bypasses rational thought and goes straight for the emotional core.
Sounds a bit like something a stage magician would do, creating an illusion to distract the audience.
There are definitely some parallels there. Think about it this way. You're pitching a new product. Instead of just handing someone a dry business plan, what if you create a presentation that showcases its benefits in a visually engaging way? Tell a story that connects with them emotionally.
Right, you're creating an experience, something memorable. Greene mentions a moon doctor who used a moonlit beer hall to enhance his reputation as a healer. What was that all about?
The moon doctor understood the power of atmosphere. He knew that the visual impact of that setting, the moonlight, the social buzz, it would all work together to create this sense of awe and mystery. It made his healing abilities seem even more potent.
It's like setting the stage for a performance. And Greene also talks about Julius Caesar and how he used visuals and symbols to build his image.
Oh, Caesar was a master of this. The purple robes, the laurel wreaths, the carefully crafted announcements, he understood how to project an aura of power and authority. He was branding himself centuries before branding was even a thing.
So it's not just about what you say, it's about how you present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How can our listeners apply this in their own lives? I mean, most of us aren't Roman emperors.
Think about your online presence. Are you using visuals, storytelling to engage your audience? Are you projecting the image you want others to see? In today's world, first impressions are often made online, so it's important to be mindful of the visual narrative you're creating.
It's like being the director of your own personal brand. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Law 42. Isolate the troublemaker. This one sounds a little ominous.
Well, it's definitely a law that requires careful consideration. It's about recognizing those individuals whose actions, whether intentionally or not, threaten the stability of the group.
So we're talking about that classic squeaky wheels scenario, the person who's always stirring up trouble.
It can be that, but it can also be someone who genuinely thinks they're doing the right thing, but their methods are disruptive or divisive. It's about being able to discern between someone who's genuinely trying to help and someone who's just causing problems.
I see. So it's about protecting the group from negative influences. Greene talks about the Athenians and their practice of ostracism, banishing people from the city for 10 years. That seems pretty extreme.
It was, but they saw it as a necessary measure to protect their democracy. They understood that one person's actions could have a ripple effect, destabilize the entire system.
It's like a preemptive strike, removing a potential threat before it can do too much damage.
Precisely. And while ostracism is obviously not a solution for every situation, it highlights the importance of recognizing when someone's actions are detrimental to the group and taking appropriate action.
Okay, so how can our listeners apply this in their own lives? We can't exactly banish our annoying coworker to a deserted island.
Think of it like this. You're on a team project, and one person is constantly undermining the group's efforts. Instead of letting their negativity poison the entire team, try addressing their concerns directly. Maybe you can find a way to redirect their energy, or if necessary, involve a supervisor or manager.
So it's about recognizing the potential for disruption and taking steps to either neutralize the negative influence or remove the individual from the situation entirely. That's a valuable takeaway for anyone working in a team environment. It's all about protecting the group, making sure everyone's pulling in the same direction. But what about protecting yourself? Law 47, master the art of timing. That seems like it could apply to pretty much every aspect of life.
Oh, absolutely. Timing is everything. Think of it like surfing. You can't just paddle out and expect to catch any wave. You have to wait for the right one, the one that's going to carry you to success.
I like that analogy. So it's not just about being decisive, it's also about being patient, recognizing when the conditions are right.
Yeah.
How do you know when the timing's off? What are some red flags?
Well, if you're constantly hitting roadblocks, if your ideas are being shot down, if you feel like you're swimming upstream, that's a pretty good sign that the timing isn't right.
So it's about reading the room, picking your battles. Greene talks about the American punitive expedition against Machiavelli. How does that story illustrate this?
The U.S. went into Mexico to capture Villa, but they ended up staying way too long. The longer they stayed, the more it actually helped Villa. It boosted his reputation, made the Americans look weak and ineffective.
They totally misjudged the situation. It's like they missed their window of opportunity and it ended up backfiring on them.
Exactly. And think about how this applies to everyday life. Let's say you're trying to negotiate a raise. If your boss is stressed, in a bad mood, that's probably not the best time to bring it up.
Right. Timing is everything. You got to strike while the iron's hot. Okay, enough about timing. Let's talk about something a little less pleasant. Law 48. Beware the envious.
Ah, yes, envy, a powerful and destructive force. And it's everywhere.
How do we protect ourselves from it? I mean, you can't exactly control other people's emotions.
True. But you can recognize the signs. Watch out for backhanded compliments, subtle undermining, even outright sabotage. People who are envious often can't help but try to bring you down.
It's like they're threatened by your success, so they try to dim your light. Greene uses the example of Sir Walter Raleigh. What happened to him?
Raleigh was incredibly talented and successful, but his success made him a target. People were envious of his achievements, his charm, his wit.
So how do we avoid becoming a target? Do we have to hide our talents?
Not necessarily. You don't want to downplay your strengths entirely, but a little humility can go a long way. Find a minor flaw you can showcase. Something that makes you seem more relatable, less perfect. People are less likely to envy someone who seems human, flawed.
So it's about not making yourself a target, not rubbing your success in people's faces. All right, let's move on to a law that seems like pretty solid advice for anyone, not just those seeking power. Law 29, plan all the way to the end.
Absolutely. Having a clear vision of your goal and anticipating potential obstacles is crucial in any endeavor. You can't just wing it and hope for the best.
Right, you need a roadmap, but don't you also need to be flexible? Things don't always go according to plan.
Of course. But having a plan gives you a framework, a starting point. Greene uses the example of Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the explorer who was obsessed with finding El Dorado, the city of gold.
Ah, Balboa. Driven by ambition, but ultimately blinded by it.
Exactly. He was so fixated on the gold that he failed to plan for the long term. He made reckless decisions, alienated his allies, and ultimately met a tragic end.
So it's not just about having a dream, it's about having a realistic plan for achieving it. Being prepared for setbacks, knowing how to adapt when things go wrong. How can our listeners apply this to their own lives?
Think about it like planning a trip. You wouldn't just hop on a plane without booking a hotel or doing some research, would you? The same principle applies to your goals. Break them down into smaller steps, anticipate potential challenges, and have a backup plan.
So be prepared, but be flexible.
Got it. Okay, let's talk about a law that sounds a little mischievous. Law 17, cultivate an air of unpredictability.
Yes, the element of surprise. Being unpredictable can be a very powerful tool.
But isn't it a bit risky? Could it backfire?
It certainly can if it's not done strategically. The key is to be unpredictable in a way that serves your goals. So it's about being calculated in your unpredictability. Greene uses the example of Boris Spassky, the chess grandmaster who was known for his predictable style of play.
Ah, yes, Spassky. He was ultimately defeated by Bobby Fischer, who was famous for his unconventional and unpredictable moves.
So Spassky couldn't anticipate Fischer's strategy, and that psychological advantage gave Fischer the edge.
Exactly. By being unpredictable, you keep your opponents off balance. They can't figure out your next move, and that gives you a huge advantage.
Makes sense. How can our listeners apply this without becoming completely erratic?
It's about finding opportunities to surprise people in a positive way. Take on a project no one expects you to be interested in. Propose a solution that's outside the box. The key is to be calculated in your unpredictability. Make sure your actions are aligned with your goals.
So it's about being strategic and creative, knowing when to play it safe and when to take a calculated risk. Now, let's talk about Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. This one seems a bit counterintuitive. Wouldn't being present make you more respected?
Not necessarily. This law is based on the principle of scarcity. The less available you are, the more valuable you become. Think about it, if you're always around, people take you for granted. But if you make yourself scarce, they start to appreciate your presence more.
It's like that saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Who does Greene use as an example?
He talks about Louis XIV, the Sun King. He understood the power of absence. He carefully orchestrated his appearances, never made himself too accessible to his courtiers. This created a sense of awe, anticipation. People were always eager to be in his presence.
So he was the center of attention, but never overexposed.
Smart. How can we apply this in a world where we're constantly bombarded with messages and notifications? It's not like we can all just disappear into a palace.
It's about being mindful of your time and attention. Don't be afraid to say no to requests that don't align with your priorities. Step away from the constant barrage of emails and social media. Create a sense of space around yourself, and you'll find that people value your time and insights more. It's about setting boundaries, protecting your energy. Excellent advice. Okay, let's talk about Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude.
This one sounds a bit cynical, but it's really just a recognition of human nature. People are more likely to help you if they see that it's in their own best interest to do so.
That's like, what's in it for me? So how can we apply this without being manipulative?
Think about the benefits the other person will receive by helping you. Can you offer something in return? Connect them with someone valuable. Highlight how your success will benefit them as well. Frame your request in a way that's mutually beneficial.
It's about finding that win-win scenario. Greene talks about approaching someone in a position of power. Why is appealing to their mercy or gratitude a bad idea?
Because it puts them in a position of superiority. It makes them feel obligated. And people don't like to feel pressured or manipulated.
Makes sense. It's much more effective to show them how helping you will also benefit them. All right, let's move on to Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. Isn't that a bit counterintuitive? Wouldn't a fortress keep you safe?
Not necessarily. Isolating yourself might seem like a good way to protect yourself, but it can actually make you more vulnerable. When you shut yourself off from the world, you lose sight of what's going on. You become disconnected from valuable information, potential allies, opportunities.
So it's like that saying, ignorance is bliss, but in this case, ignorance could be your downfall.
Hmm.
Greene talks about Louis XIV again, who, despite having that massive palace at Versailles, still made an effort to stay connected to the pulse of his kingdom. How did he manage that?
He made a point of venturing outside the palace walls, gathering information from advisors, staying informed about the concerns of his people. He understood that true power comes from being connected to the world, not isolated from it.
So it's about being present and engaged, both within your immediate circle and in the wider world. How can we apply this without a kingdom to rule?
Think about your own networks and connections. Are you engaging with people outside your comfort zone, staying informed about your industry, open to new ideas and perspectives? These are all ways to avoid isolation and stay connected to the flow of information and opportunity.
It's about expanding your horizons, not getting stuck in an echo chamber.
All right, on to a law that might make some listeners a little uncomfortable. Law 20. Do not commit to anyone.
This one often raises eyebrows, but it's really about preserving your freedom and flexibility. When you commit too early, you limit your options and make yourself vulnerable to manipulation.
So it's about staying neutral, not taking sides too quickly. Greene uses the example of Queen Elizabeth I, who famously never married.
Exactly. By staying uncommitted, Elizabeth was able to play her suitors against each other, maintain her independence, strengthen her own position. She was a master of the game of power.
That's brilliant. How can we apply this in our own lives without becoming hermits? It's not about being cold or detached, but about being discerning and strategic in your commitments. Don't rush into agreements or alliances without carefully considering the implications. Take your time, weigh your options, make sure any commitment you make is aligned with your own goals.
So it's about protecting your own interest, not letting yourself be swept up in someone else's agenda. Now let's talk about something a little bolder. Law 28. Interaction with boldness.
Boldness, a quality that can make or break you.
But isn't there a danger in being too bold? Could it backfire?
Of course. Boldness without strategy is just recklessness. The key is to take calculated risks, be decisive in your actions, but also be mindful of the potential consequences.
So it's about being courageous, but also smart. Think before you leap, as they say. Greene talks about the yellow kid in his audacious con game.
Yes, his success was due in part to his boldness. He wasn't afraid to think big, take risks. Of course, he was also a master manipulator, but that's a topic for another day.
Right, so boldness can pay off, but it needs to be tempered with strategy. Okay, this next one might be a little hard to swallow, Law 38. Think as you like, but behave like others. That sounds a bit conformist, doesn't it?
It might seem that way, but it's about understanding the power of social conformity. When you're trying to gain power or influence, standing out too much can make you a target.
Because people are suspicious of those who are different. They see it as a threat.
Exactly. They see it as a challenge to their own beliefs, their way of life. Greene uses the example of the Spartans, known for their rigid conformity. While it might seem extreme, it also contributed to their military success.
So it's about fitting in, not drawing unnecessary attention to yourself.
Yeah.
But doesn't that stifle creativity?
It's about finding a balance. You can still maintain your own beliefs and values while outwardly conforming to social norms. Think of it like wearing a uniform to work. You might not love the uniform, but you wear it because it's expected. It allows you to fit in with the group.
So pick your battles. Know when to conform and when to assert your individuality. All right, let's move on to something a little more heart-centered, Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others.
Yes, the power of influence. This law recognizes that true power comes from winning over the hearts and minds of others.
Because people are more likely to follow someone they admire and trust.
Exactly. Think about the leaders you admire. They're not just competent, they're charismatic, inspiring. They connect with people on an emotional level.
Greene uses the example of Cyrus the Great, who built a vast empire by winning over his people. How did he manage that?
He appealed to their self-interest, showed them how he could improve their lives. He inspired them with his vision. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a leader who genuinely cared about his people.
So it's about being authentic, connecting with people on a human level. But isn't there a danger in being too emotional, in letting your feelings cloud your judgment?
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between head and heart, between logic and empathy.
So it's about being emotionally intelligent, but also strategic. Okay, let's move on to Law 45. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once.
This one's all about understanding human nature. People are resistant to change, even when it's for the better.
Because change is disruptive, it can be scary.
Exactly. Greene uses the example of the French Revolution. It started with noble intentions, but quickly descended into chaos and violence.
The changes were too much, too fast.
Exactly. It's about pacing yourself, introducing change gradually so people have time to adjust.
So how can our listeners apply this? I mean, most of us aren't leading revolutions.
Think about trying to implement a new system at work. If you try to change everything overnight, you're going to meet resistance. Introduce changes gradually, give people time to learn and adapt.
So be patient, be strategic.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, here's a law that might sting a little bit. Law 46. Never appear too perfect. Why is it bad to strive for perfection?
Because perfection is intimidating. It makes people feel insecure, inadequate. Think about it, no one likes to be around someone who seems to have it all figured out.
It's like they're setting an impossible standard that makes everyone else feel bad. Greene talks about Sir Walter Raleigh again, who was both admired and envied. How did his perfection contribute to his downfall?
Raleigh's talents and successes made him a target for those who felt threatened by his perfection. They couldn't measure up, so they sought to bring him down.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being relatable. How do we do that without deliberately sabotaging ourselves?
It's about being authentic. Let people see your human side. Admit your mistakes. Show vulnerability. Let people know you're not perfect. This makes you more approachable, relatable, and ultimately more likable.
So embrace your imperfections. Good advice. Okay, let's talk about Law 12. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. This one sounds a little, well, manipulative.
It can be, but it can also be a very effective way to build trust and influence. Honesty and generosity, especially when they're unexpected, can be incredibly disarming.
Can you give us an example?
Think about a time when someone did something unexpectedly nice for you. Maybe a coworker brought you coffee when you were stressed, or a stranger helped you carry groceries. These small acts of kindness can make you feel obligated to reciprocate.
That's true. Greene talks about Count Victor Lustig, the con man, who was a master of this. How did he use it?
Lustig would often tell his victims the truth about his cons, but in a way that made them feel like they were in on the joke. He'd also be generous with his winnings, making his victims feel like they were benefiting from his schemes.
Wow, that's sneaky. So how can we use this ethically without resorting to con artistry?
It's about finding genuine ways to be helpful and generous. Offer to mentor a colleague. Volunteer your time. Go out of your way to do something nice for someone. These acts of kindness will build trust and goodwill, which can be valuable assets in any relationship.
It's about being authentically kind, not manipulative. All right, let's move on to a law that sounds a bit intense. Law 27, play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
This one delves into the psychology of belief. People have a deep-seated need to believe in something, to find meaning and purpose.
So when they're feeling lost or uncertain, they're more susceptible to the appeal of a charismatic leader or a compelling ideology.
Exactly. Think about the various cults and movements throughout history. They often prey on people's fears, insecurities, and desires.
And what kind of tactics do these leaders use?
They offer simple solutions to complex problems. They appeal to emotions. They create a sense of community, of belonging.
So how can we apply this in our own lives without starting a cult? I mean, that's not exactly ethical.
It's about understanding the power of shared beliefs and values. If you're trying to build a team, lead a movement, connect with people on a deeper level, tap into that need to believe in something bigger than themselves.
It's about inspiring people, giving them a sense of purpose. Now, here's a law that sounds a bit like Sour Grapes Law 36. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge.
This one's about letting go of envy and resentment. When you focus on what you can't have, you're only torturing yourself.
It's like comparing yourself to others. It's a recipe for unhappiness.
Exactly. Greene says the best revenge is to simply ignore those things and focus on your own goals. By doing so, you not only deny your rivals the satisfaction of seeing you suffer, but you also free yourself from the burden of their success.
So let go of what you can't control. Focus on what you can. Okay, let's move on to a law that might seem a bit old-fashioned. Law 24. Play the perfect courtier.
Ah, yes, the art of courtly behavior. It might seem outdated, but the principles are still relevant today.
Because it's all about navigating social dynamics, understanding the unspoken rules of the game.
Precisely. Greene offers a set of guidelines for playing the perfect courtier. Guidelines that can help you win favor, avoid making enemies, achieve your goals, be discreet, observant, adaptable, charming. Be a good listener, be able to read people and understand their motivations.
It's all about being socially intelligent.
Yeah.
But how do we do this without coming across as fake?
It's about finding that balance between being genuine and being socially savvy. You don't want to be phony, but you also don't want to be oblivious to the social dynamics at play.
So be authentic, but also adaptable.
Got it. Okay, here's a law that might make some listeners a little uncomfortable. Law 33, discover each man's thumbscrew. That sounds a bit sinister.
It might sound that way, but it's simply a recognition that everyone has weaknesses, vulnerabilities. And if you can identify those weaknesses, you can use them to your advantage.
So it's about understanding human psychology, being able to read people, but isn't that manipulative?
It can be, which is why it's important to use this knowledge ethically. The goal is not to exploit people, but to understand what motivates them, how to appeal to their interests. Greene talks about playing on people's insecurities, fears, desires. Can you give some examples of how this might work?
Imagine you're trying to persuade someone to do something. If you know what they fear most, you can use that fear as motivation. Or if you know what they desire most, you can use that desire to entice them.
So it's about understanding what makes people tick, but using that knowledge responsibly.
Exactly. It's about being persuasive, not coercive.
All right, let's move on to a law that might raise a few eyebrows. Law 15. Crush your enemy totally.
This one always sparks debate.
I bet. It sounds a bit ruthless.
It can be, but in the realm of power, a half-defeated enemy is a dangerous enemy. They might come back to seek revenge.
So you got to finish the job. Eliminate the threat completely.
It's about being decisive, protecting your interests, but there's a danger in being too ruthless. You don't want to create more enemies than you defeat.
So know when to show mercy. Pick your battles.
Exactly. Sometimes it's better to offer a path to reconciliation rather than crushing your enemy completely.
So it's a judgment call.
All right, let's move on to something a bit more metaphorical. Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish. What's that all about?
This one's about recognizing that chaos and confusion can create opportunities. When people are uncertain, afraid, they're more likely to make mistakes, act impulsively, be swayed by a strong leader.
So it's about creating a power vacuum that you can then fill.
In a way, yes, but it's a dangerous game. You need to know how to create just enough disruption to achieve your goals without destabilizing the entire system.
So it's about controlled chaos. You're the one stirring the waters, but you're also in control of the current. Okay, let's talk about a law that might seem a bit self-serving. Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you.
This one's about the power of indispensability. The more people depend on you, the more influence you have.
Because if people need you, they're more likely to do what you want.
Exactly. Think about the people in your life who have the most power. They're often the ones who provide something that others need, whether it's money, information, connections, or emotional support. So it's about being valuable, about providing something that others can't get anywhere else. But how do we do this without being manipulative?
It's about focusing on genuine relationships, providing real value, consistently helping others, giving them something they need. They'll come to rely on you naturally, but it should be based on respect, trust, not manipulation.
So you're a valuable resource, someone people can count on, but not because they're being forced to. Greene talks about ways to make yourself indispensable. What are some of those?
Well, you could become the go-to person for certain skills or knowledge. Be a connector, someone who can introduce people to the right contacts, or even be a source of pleasure, entertainment. The key is reliability. Be someone people can always count on.
So build a reputation for competence, trustworthiness. But isn't there a risk of people becoming too dependent? What if they can't function without you?
That's a valid concern. You don't want to create a situation where people are helpless. It's a balance. Being helpful, but also empowering others to be self-sufficient.
Guide them, but don't become a crutch.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about a law that seems a bit counterintuitive, Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. We're always told communication is key, so how does this work?
Communication is important, sure, but when it comes to power, actions speak louder. Demonstrate your strength, your competence through what you do, not just what you say.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly. Trying to convince your boss you deserve a promotion. Words might not be enough, but consistently exceeding expectations, taking initiative, going above and beyond. Those actions make a statement.
Let your accomplishments do the talking. And what about dealing with rivals? Why is arguing a bad idea?
Because it gives them ammunition, makes you look weak, it's more effective to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, or just plain outwork them.
Prove your superiority through your actions, not your words. Got it. Now, this next law seems especially relevant in today's world. Law 5, so much depends on reputation with your life. It's true, your reputation is everything, especially now when information spreads so quickly. It's the foundation of your credibility, your influence.
It's like your personal brand.
Yeah.
And with social media, it can be hard to control.
Exactly. One negative review, one bad post can do a lot of damage. You need to be proactive. Manage your online presence, build a positive image.
So it's not enough to be good at what you do, you have to be seen as being good. What are some ways to build and protect your reputation?
Be discreet. Be consistent in your words and actions. Associate yourself with winners. And be prepared to defend yourself against attacks.
Offense and defense. Be proactive and reactive. But can't we become too obsessed with our reputation?
Of course. You don't want to live in fear of what others think. It's about finding that balance, being mindful of your image while staying true to yourself.
Be authentic, but strategic.
Hmm.
I like it. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, explored some fascinating and sometimes unsettling laws of power. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
These laws are tools. Use them wisely. Be aware of the power dynamics at play, understand the strategies, make conscious choices about how you want to navigate the world.
Be a savvy player in the game of life. Understand the rules, but make your own moves. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of power and strategy. Remember, knowledge is power. By understanding these laws, we can all become more effective, more empowered individuals.
Well said.
Until next time, stay sharp.